You've probably been told that the only way to find yourself as an empath is through meditation, therapy, or years of spiritual retreats. But Carl Jung uncovered something far more radical, a psychological map almost nobody talks about. This isn't a quick fix technique or a new age bypass. It's a process that takes your sensitivity, the very thing you've been told makes you weak, and turns it into your doorway to individuation. Picture this. You're sitting alone at night after absorbing everyone's feelings all day. Your friend's panic, a coworker's resentment, your family's silent tension. You can sense every shade of their inner world. Yet when you try to connect with your own authentic self, there's only emptiness. Jung recognized this state decades ago. He called it a crisis of individuation, and for empaths, it's a unique challenge. Your greatest gift also becomes your greatest obstacle. Most people wear a mask to hide from others. Empaths, Jung noticed, often wear masks to hide from themselves. Every time you put someone's emotional needs ahead of your own inner voice, you strengthen what he called the persona and weaken your connection to the self. You start confusing constant self-sacrifice with spiritual growth. But true compassion, Jung warned, can only flow from an integrated self, not from a fragmented empath lost in other people's chaos. Here's the part that rattles most empaths. Your ability to feel everyone's emotions isn't just a gift. It's also been programming you to abandon your own authentic identity. Deep down, there's a part of you that loves being the chosen one, the person everyone turns to in a crisis. This is what Jung called the wounded healer complex. It manipulates through martyrdom, controls through caretaking, and feeds off being indispensable. Even if you've never admitted it, there's probably a part of you that feels special because you can sense what others can't. That same shadow side is where your rage lives. Years of suppressed anger about boundary violations, ignored needs, and buried authenticity. Because you've been taught that anger isn't spiritual, you've pushed it underground. There it festers as passive aggression, victimhood, and what Jung termed emotional possession. He observed that, quote, "The healthy man does not torture others. Generally, it is the tortured who turn into torturers." Unintegrated empathy carries the potential to weaponize sensitivity, guilt trips, emotional overwhelm, withdrawal of your healing presence. The most dangerous aspect is projection. You cast your disowned anger onto others, labeling them toxic or narcissistic, while overlooking the same patterns in yourself. Jung called this becoming a shadow hunter, fixated on darkness in others while blind to your own. Shadow acknowledgement isn't about shame, it's about integration. Jung taught that once the shadow becomes conscious, it turns into a source of authentic power instead of unconscious manipulation. This is the first step on his empathic map. The second step exposes the sensitive persona, the false identity you've built around being emotionally available to everyone but yourself. On the surface, it seems noble. Underneath, it's a defense mechanism. You learned early that being sensitive and selfless earns you approval and a sense of purpose. But the stronger the persona, the more your authentic self goes underground. This is what I call empathic performance. Without realizing it, you're scanning rooms for emotional disturbances, adjusting your energy to soothe others, and absorbing tension like a reflex. Ironically, this doesn't make you more empathic. It disconnects you from genuine empathy. Real empathy requires clear boundaries, knowing where you end and others begin. Each time you successfully calm someone's anxiety or absorb their anger, you get a tiny hit of validation. Jung named this the helper's high, a form of psychological addiction. Your worth starts to feel tied to regulating other people's emotions. But there's a cost. You suppress your own needs, minimize your own pain, and neglect your inner truth. Jung wrote, quote, "The foundation of all mental illness is the unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering. For empaths, that legitimate suffering includes the grief of not being seen, the rage at constant boundary violations, and the terror of finding out who you are without the caretaker role. The persona shields you from these truths, but it also blocks your authentic power. At some point, the false self cracks. The emotional fusion becomes exhausting. The performance feels like a prison." Jung emphasized that this breakdown isn't pathology. It's the psyche trying to return you to your true self. The question isn't whether the empathic persona will collapse. but whether you'll have the courage to meet your authentic self when it does. His map for empathic individuation requires what I call conscious separation, the deliberate process of distinguishing your authentic self from the emotional fusion you've been living in. Individuation means telling the difference between your own emotions and absorbed emotions, between intuition and anxious hypervigilance, between authentic compassion and codependent caretaking. This feels like betrayal at first. You've been conditioned to believe that absorbing others' pain is proof of your spirituality or goodness. Letting go of that feels like dying. But Jung mapped 4 stages that appear again and again in an empath's growth spiral. Shadow integration, consciously acknowledging your need to be needed, your anger about boundary violations, and your secret superiority about being more sensitive. This dismantles the identity that once earned you love and purpose. Persona dissolution, releasing the role of emotional caretaker. This is the dark night of the soul for empaths. Without other people's drama, you're forced to face the emptiness you've been avoiding. Active imagination, learning to dialogue with your own unconscious instead of processing everyone else's. This means paying attention to dreams, honoring your own emotional needs, and developing internal empathy, the ability to feel and validate your own inner experience. Self-realization, the emergence of what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to feel deeply without losing yourself, to help others without abandoning your own needs, to be sensitive without being porous. Jung warned that individuation isn't linear. The greatest and most important problems of life, he wrote, are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved but only outgrown. You don't solve your empathic challenges. You develop a larger container that can hold both your sensitivity and your sovereignty. When you start setting boundaries, people may call you selfish. That's your sign that individuation is working. You're choosing yourself for the first time. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites, learning to be both open and boundaried, compassionate and self-protective, sensitive and strong. This isn't about becoming less empathic. It's about becoming a conscious empath rather than an unconscious emotional sponge. Jung's most profound insight for empaths involves the collective unconscious, the shared psychological inheritance of humanity. He wrote, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul." Your sensitivity isn't just picking up individual emotions, it's tuning into archetypal patterns that run through everyone. This explains why you sometimes feel overwhelmed in crowds or triggered by certain people for reasons you can't name. You're unconsciously channeling archetypal energies, universal patterns like the mother, the warrior, the victim, the savior. When someone activates the victim archetype, your unconscious automatically activates the savior. You think you're being compassionate, but you're actually possessed by an ancient pattern. Jung called this participation mystique, a state where you lose individual consciousness and merge with collective psychological forces. His revolutionary insight, your empathic sensitivity can become a doorway to individuation instead of an obstacle. When you learn to work consciously with archetypal energies instead of being possessed by them, you develop what I call sacred empathy, the ability to help others without losing yourself. Dreams are the primary way the collective unconscious speaks. For empaths, they often contain guidance about boundaries and self-protection. Pay attention to dreams where you're saying no or standing firm. These are messages from your individuating psyche. Synchronicities, those eerie, meaningful coincidences, also show up when you begin setting boundaries or honoring your own needs. Jung saw them as signals that the unconscious and conscious are aligning. This is the beginning of empathic alchemy, transforming your sensitivity from a burden into a superpower. You've begun to see how Jung's map reframes empathy from an unconscious reflex into a conscious practice. The next part of the journey shows how this works day to day. Most empaths discover that their sensitivity is like a magnet. Without realizing it, you draw in people's anxiety, anger, hopes, and needs. You start the day thinking you're calm, but within an hour you're carrying someone else's storm. Jung taught that consciousness begins with observation. Every morning ask yourself, what am I feeling that's actually mine? This simple scan exposes how much of your emotional state belongs to other people. Creating an empathy journal helps. Track your moods, your physical sensations, and the people or environments around you. Patterns emerge that reveal your unconscious programming. Once you see the pattern, you can begin using boundary rituals. Jung understood that the body holds psychological patterns. Physical or symbolic acts give the psyche permission to reset. You might visualize a protective sphere around you before walking into a tense meeting. Wash your hands while imagining you're releasing other people's emotions. Or take 3 deliberate breaths between interactions to reconnect with your own center. These empathic transitions sound trivial, but they retrain your nervous system to return to itself. As you practice boundary rituals, you'll also need authentic expression. For years, you've been minimizing your own preferences to keep the peace. Now you start small. If you don't want to attend a social event because you're depleted, say no without elaborate justification. If someone's energy feels draining, limit your exposure without guilt. Jung called this ethical egoism, caring for yourself not from selfishness, but from the recognition that your well-being serves the greater good. Shadow work deepens at this stage. You consciously engage with the parts you've rejected, the need to be needed, the anger at boundary violations, the superiority about being more evolved. Integration requires befriending the shadow rather than eliminating it. Each time you acknowledge one of these aspects, you reclaim psychic energy that was locked up in repression. This is how the dark empath transforms, by owning the ways sensitivity can become destructive when it's not conscious. Jung warned that people will do anything to avoid facing their own soul. Unintegrated empaths often drift into what he called emotional possession, a subtle addiction to drama because it gives a sense of purpose and aliveness. Without realizing it, you create or attract crises, so you can keep playing the wounded healer. You may even weaponize your sensitivity, manipulating through overwhelm, controlling through victimhood, punishing through withdrawal of your healing presence. Jung called this psychological poisoning, where the unintegrated shadow contaminates empathic gifts. Projection intensifies the trap. You cast your disowned selfishness onto others, labeling them narcissistic while ignoring your own narcissistic need to be the special chosen healer. You become obsessed with identifying toxic people, but remain blind to your own toxic patterns. Jung taught that projection always involves your least developed capacities: healthy aggression, appropriate selfishness, and boundary setting without guilt. You try to heal or fix those qualities in others because you've refused to integrate them in yourself. Healing begins when you admit that your empathic gifts can be destructive when they're not conscious. Integration means owning your capacity for manipulation, your addiction to drama, and your unconscious superiority. This isn't about shame. It's about turning automatic patterns into deliberate choice. Jung discovered that the shadow, once integrated, becomes a source of authentic power. Hidden inside your dark empath shadow is your capacity for clear boundaries, healthy selfishness, and the ability to say no without guilt. Another turning point on Jung's map is recognizing the empathic mirror. Every person you're drawn to heal is reflecting an aspect of your own psyche. Jung wrote that everyone you meet knows something you need to know. The wounded person who triggers your rescue response may mirror your unhealed wounds. The angry person who activates your peacekeeping tendencies may be carrying the rage you've been suppressing. The narcissist who exhausts your empathy may be showing you your own disowned need for attention and validation. Empaths are unconsciously drawn to people who carry their projected shadow material. You need others to carry your disowned qualities, and they need you to absorb their overflow. This is why empathic relationships so often become codependent. But once you recognize the mirror effect, every relationship becomes an opportunity for individuation. Instead of trying to fix others, you can ask, what aspect of myself is this person reflecting? What disowned quality are they carrying? What unlived potential are they showing me? This shift turns empathy from unconscious absorption into conscious reflection. Using relationships as mirrors is a form of active imagination. Rather than treating people as projects for repair, you use the interaction to explore your own psyche. The person whose neediness drains you may be reflecting your own disowned dependency. The individual whose anger frightens you may be carrying the rage you're afraid to express. Integration begins when you stop trying to change others and start asking what they're teaching you about yourself. This doesn't mean becoming self-absorbed. It means using your empathic sensitivity as a tool for self-discovery instead of self-abandonment. Conscious empaths develop psychological reciprocity, the ability to give and receive healing simultaneously. When you heal your own projected material, you naturally help others heal theirs, not by absorbing, but by standing in authentic presence. Jung's vision of the individuated empath is someone who has integrated sensitivity with selfhood. This person can feel deeply without being overwhelmed, care without being consumed, and help without being depleted. Individuation doesn't eliminate empathy, it refines it. You develop sacred discernment, the capacity to tell the difference between authentic guidance and anxious hypervigilance, between genuine intuition and projected fear, between healthy empathy and codependent absorption. Your service becomes an expression of your authentic self, rather than a desperate attempt to earn love or purpose. Witnessing consciousness replaces emotional fusion. You hold space for others without taking on their experience. You can feel someone's pain without making it your responsibility, offer support without attachment to outcomes, love without losing yourself. Relationships shift from codependent fusion to conscious partnership. You attract people who don't need you to carry their emotional burdens, and you no longer need others to validate your worth through their healing process. The individuated empath becomes a bridge between worlds, able to navigate both the emotional realm and the practical world, both spiritual sensitivity and psychological maturity, both individual authenticity and collective service. Leadership emerges not through dominance but through integration. Your authentic presence gives others permission to be authentic. Your boundaries teach others about healthy relationships. Your self-care models how to honor sensitivity without martyrdom. The goal isn't to stop being sensitive, it's to become consciously empathic. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Transformation happens through the transcendent function, moments when opposing forces within you resolve into a higher synthesis. For empaths, this means integrating the urge to help others with the need to honor yourself, the capacity for deep feeling with the requirement for emotional boundaries. Jung taught that transformation occurs in spirals rather than straight lines. You'll meet the same patterns again and again: the urge to absorb others, pain, the compulsion to fix, the guilt about setting boundaries, but each time from a deeper level of awareness. Over time, you develop emotional alchemy, the ability to transform absorbed energy into conscious wisdom. Instead of being overwhelmed, you witness it, understand its message, and respond from your authentic center rather than reactive empathy. This phase feels like psychological death and rebirth. Your old identity as wounded healer and emotional sponge has to die for your authentic empathic self to emerge. The process can be terrifying because you're releasing the persona that earned you love and purpose. But Jung discovered that on the other side of this death lies the birth of the self, your empathic nature freed from unconscious programming and codependent patterns. You become someone who serves from strength rather than neediness, heals from wholeness rather than woundedness. The transformation is complete when your empathy becomes a conscious choice instead of an unconscious compulsion. You can feel others, emotions without taking them on, offer support without abandoning yourself, set boundaries without guilt or drama. Jung called this the state of the healed wounded healer, the person who guides others through emotional challenges because they've successfully navigated their own. Your sensitivity becomes a gift you offer the world from a place of wholeness rather than a burden you carry. This is the essence of conscious empathy. You now reach the final movement of Jung's empathic map, the stage where sensitivity becomes mastery rather than struggle. By this point, you've practiced emotional sorting, boundary rituals, authentic expression, shadow integration, and using relationships as mirrors. All of these steps point toward one goal: conscious empathy. Conscious empathy is not about being less sensitive. It's about holding your sensitivity with sovereignty. You choose when to open your emotional boundaries and when to maintain them. You feel others' pain without taking it on as your own. You offer support without sacrificing your well-being. Jung called this the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposites in creative tension. You can be both vulnerable and protected, open-hearted and boundaried, caring, and detached. The first test of this integration is boundary consciousness in real time. You begin to notice subtle signals in your body, a tightening in the chest, a shift in mood, that tell you you're picking up something that isn't yours. Instead of reacting automatically, you pause and name it. This belongs to them. You let the energy move on without guilt or drama. Over time, this becomes second nature. Your nervous system learns to stay centered even in emotional storms. The second test is authentic response. Instead of automatically soothing, rescuing, or fixing, you allow people to have their own experiences. Jung called this loving detachment, caring about someone without being responsible for their healing. This can feel radical to an empath conditioned to believe that not absorbing someone's pain equals not caring. But in reality, your absorption has been enabling rather than healing. By stepping back, you give others the chance to develop their own resilience. The third test is sacred service, learning to serve from wholeness rather than woundedness. Jung wrote that creation springs from the play instinct, acting from inner necessity. When you serve from your authentic self rather than from empathic compulsion, your gifts become genuinely transformative. You develop what I call witnessing presence, the ability to hold space for another's experience without absorbing it, to offer wisdom without attachment to outcomes, to love without losing yourself. This is the difference between being an emotional sponge and being a lighthouse. True empathic service requires self-possession. You can't give what you don't have, and you can't hold space for others if you're not holding space for yourself. The integration process teaches you that self-care isn't selfish. It's the foundation of authentic empathy. The ultimate test is whether you can maintain your center while others are in emotional chaos. Whether you can offer support without abandoning your own needs. Whether you can be fully present without disappearing into other people's experiences. This is where empathic alchemy becomes real. Every morning, you might still scan your emotional state, but now you do it with curiosity rather than dread. You track which environments energize you and which drain you. You create deliberate transitions between interactions. These simple practices anchor your nervous system and prevent emotional fusion before it starts. You also begin to express your own preferences and needs as a default rather than an exception. You speak up without apology. You say no without over-explaining. You stop dramatizing your sensitivity to gain attention or to avoid responsibility. Jung called this ethical egoism and saw it as a moral duty, taking care of yourself so you can show up authentically for others. Shadow work continues, but it changes character. Instead of dredging up repressed material in crisis, you now engage it consciously. You recognize your own capacity for psychological manipulation or superiority before it acts out. You acknowledge your occasional hunger for drama and release it rather than feeding it. This turns your once unconscious shadow into a reservoir of healthy aggression, clarity, and self-respect. Your relationships shift in response. People who depended on your constant caretaking may drift away. Those who remain begin to meet you as equals. You attract partners, friends, and colleagues who don't need you to carry their emotional burdens and who respect your boundaries. Codependent bonds dissolve. In their place arise what Jung called conscious partnerships, connections based on mutual authenticity rather than unconscious role-playing. Jung envisioned the individuated empath as a bridge between worlds. Someone who can navigate both the emotional realm and the practical world, both spiritual sensitivity and psychological maturity, both individual authenticity and collective service. Leadership flows from integration rather than from dominance. Your presence itself becomes an invitation for others to be real. Your boundaries teach others about healthy relationships. Your self-care models how to honor sensitivity without martyrdom. You begin to embody sacred discernment, the ability to distinguish between authentic guidance and anxious hypervigilance, between genuine intuition and projected fear, between healthy empathy and codependent absorption. You no longer confuse constant availability with compassion. You recognize that true compassion flows from an integrated self. Witnessing consciousness becomes your default. You feel someone's pain without making it your responsibility. You offer support without attachment to results. You love without losing yourself. This transforms your sensitivity from an unconscious compulsion into a conscious choice. You develop what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the ability to feel deeply without being overwhelmed, to care without being consumed, to help without being depleted. Individuation doesn't make you perfect or immune to old patterns. It refines your relationship to them. You'll still feel the urge to fix, to absorb, to rescue, but you'll see it as it arises and choose differently. Each cycle deepens your capacity for what I call emotional alchemy, the transformation of absorbed energy into conscious wisdom. Instead of being swept up, you witness, interpret, and respond from your authentic center. This process can feel like repeated deaths and rebirths. Each time you shed another layer of the wounded healer persona, you emerge freer, stronger, and more authentic. Jung described this as the birth of the self, the point where your empathic nature is freed from unconscious programming and codependent patterns. You become someone who serves from strength rather than neediness, who heals from wholeness rather than woundedness. At this stage, empathy is no longer something that happens to you. It's something you practice deliberately. You can step into someone's world without losing your own. You can hold space for pain without absorbing it. You can offer guidance without controlling outcomes. This is the state of the healed, wounded healer, the conscious empath who has walked through their own fire and emerged integrated. Your sensitivity becomes a gift you offer the world from a place of wholeness rather than a burden you carry. This is not the end of your journey, but the beginning of a new way of being. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Each choice to honor your boundaries, each moment of authentic expression, each act of loving detachment is a step in that becoming. The empath who integrates Jung's map becomes both lighthouse and bridge. A lighthouse because your presence provides steady illumination without being engulfed by the storms around you. A bridge because your integration shows others how to cross from unconscious absorption to conscious empathy. This is the quiet power of the conscious sensitive, an empath whose gifts are no longer chained to compulsion but guided by choice. You don't stop feeling deeply, you stop disappearing into what you feel, you don't stop helping, you stop helping from emptiness, you don't lose your compassion. You discover its true source, an integrated self. And from that self you serve, you create, you love, and you lead without losing yourself. This is the culmination of Jung's empathic individuation. Sensitivity refined into sovereignty, empathy transformed into conscious power, the wounded healer healed. You've just walked through the entire map that Carl Jung hinted at but never fully spelled out for empaths. You now know how to shift from unconscious absorption to conscious empathy, from the wounded healer persona to the integrated self. This isn't theory anymore. It's a lived path you can start practicing today. If this message resonated with you, support the channel by liking this video and subscribing so you don't miss future deep dives into Jungian psychology and empathic mastery. Drop a comment below sharing the boundary or practice you're going to try first. Your insight might inspire someone else's breakthrough. And if you know an empath who's struggling, share this video with them. Together we can turn sensitivity from a hidden burden into a shared superpower.